Welcome, everybody, to this evening. It's Tuesday. It is October 27th. This is our chat with rabbis, and we have our guest of honor, Rabbi Zvi Kahn, an Orthodox Rabbi and Educator, along with our wonderful Rabbi Barry Silver. We're going to be talking about Lech Lecha. We're going to be talking about the upcoming election in 1 week. Can you believe it? Please, if you haven't voted, please go out and vote. And with that, turn it over to our rabbis. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sharon, for setting this up. And I think you might have to mute everybody else because I hear a lot of background noise. Is that possible?
I am going to mute. Yes, I'm going to mute. Okay, I am muting.
Okay, and once you mute, then Rabbi Kahn and I will transmute some of the wisdom from our sages. And it's a pleasure to have him here because my congregation is used to hearing my point of view, but I'm really thrilled to have Rabbi Kahn here so they can also hear the Jewish point of view. It'll be great because I've been accused of being a heathen. So I'm glad to have Rabbi Kahn here to give us the Orthodox point of view. If you don't know what Orthodox means, it means the true or correct teaching. So I'm always glad to have Rabbi Kahn here to correct me when I go astray. And we have a great passage tonight. It's really wonderful. Lech Lecha. He and I both love this passage.
Me
and
too.
Then we're gonna speak about the election a little bit, and we're thrilled to have everybody else online so they can join in. And so I'd kind of like to turn it over to Rabbi Kahn to share with us, if you would, maybe perhaps before we start, maybe you could explain to people how is it that you became an Orthodox rabbi? With all the various denominations and all the religions of the world, you could have been a Buddhist or a Hindu, or you could have been Baha'i or an atheist. How did you end up becoming Jewish? And how did you end up, of all the denominations of Judaism, how did you become Orthodox? Maybe you could just briefly share that with us and then launch into Lech Lecha.
Sure. First of all, again, thank you, Rabbi Silver, for inviting me to join, and Sharon for making all the arrangements. I think this is our third, if I'm not mistaken, this is our third joint effort, and I really enjoy it and look forward to it every week, or each time we're able to do it. So I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, and my family was not particularly religiously observant. However, based on kind of my grandparents, who also had lived in New Orleans, Louisiana, they belonged to an Orthodox synagogue, and so that's where my family continued to go. And so we belonged to that synagogue, and we were kind of associated with different things that they were doing. But when I was in third grade, when I was going into third grade, a Jewish day school opened in New Orleans, which was really a big event for the community, for there to be. It was the first Jewish day school in New Orleans in the history of the city. And it was run under Orthodox auspices. It was actually housed in the Orthodox synagogue. And some folks called my parents who were not thinking of sending me there. I was in a public school at the time. And they said, this is a new school. It'll have very small classes, and it'll have a very wholesome approach to education and Jewish values. And my parents went to check it out and go to some of the sessions that they were having to discuss this new school. And they decided to send me. And I remember going there in third grade. I'm still friendly with some of my classmates from those days. But make a long story short, that was really the key thing that happened, because from third grade to eighth grade, each year we got more involved with the school, more involved with the synagogue, more involved with religious observance. And by the time I graduated the school in eighth grade, we had become Orthodox Jews in the sense of observance and participating, and we stopped driving to the synagogue, and my dad, I remember, it was a very big thing. He was a dentist, and he gave up his working on Saturday, which was the busiest day, and it was really a very gradual, slow kind of thing. And after that, I just loved being a teacher. I loved talking about Judaism, and I had some excellent teachers. And I decided I'd like to do this also. So when I decided to try and become a rabbi, it really wasn't based in my mind on becoming a pulpit rabbi. It was based on becoming a teaching rabbi. I wanted to be a teacher because of all the fantastic, exciting, dynamic teachers that I had. And I wanted to try and do something similar and impact other children's lives in a positive way. So that's what it was all about.
Rabbi, you know, I like going to the dentist. The dentist told me the other day, he said, open your mouth and don't say anything. I said, I do that professionally. I'm a rabbi. So was it difficult for you to be raised by someone who's always looking down in the mouth, or was that was you were able to overcome that?
I actually used to love going to my dad's office, and he would have loved for me to become a dentist, but I went in a different direction. He's also okay with that too.
Now, let me ask you something else. If you had been born in Saudi Arabia, would you today be a Muslim? Or if you were born in Rome, would you today be a Christian? Did you have a time where you question your beliefs and determine, is this really the only true belief, or is this just something I'm believing because I was raised this way? Did there come a time where you paused to question the beliefs that you had to see if they were authentic?
I don't know if anyone can speak to what would have happened if they were born in an entirely different culture and society. I mean, who knows? I really have no idea. It's hard for me to imagine what that would have been like to grow up in Saudi Arabia. Maybe Rome, I could kind of picture a little bit. But I would say this. I think every person goes through questioning throughout his or her life. We all question our belief system. We think about it at different times, different events, different circumstances come up. I was raised in such a way, really from the start, to be so proud and so connected to Judaism, even before we became particularly Orthodox, was really proud to be Jewish. And I never really thought, oh, what might it be like to be a Christian or a Muslim, or as you mentioned, a Hindu or a Buddhist. I never really thought about that. Within Judaism at different times, I did think about, that Orthodoxy is a very demanding, rigorous kind of lifestyle. It demands a tremendous amount of a person in terms of what they can do, what they can't do, and it's on a daily basis. And so at different times I thought about it, and I feel very blessed to have always kind of stayed on a path that got me to where I am and to where my children, my family is, where we are together as a family. I find it a very unifying aspect of our lives. But sure, at different times, doubts, questions, thinking, absolutely. That's only human.
Yeah, did it come a time once in a while you said, gee, it would be a lot easier if I was a Reform or Pre-Constructionist, I wouldn't have to do all these rules? Was that a little temptation sometimes, or did you feel comfortable?
New Orleans is famous for its restaurants and its cooking, so it's hard not to, at times, if you live in New Orleans, think, wow, I'd like to taste that. I'd really like to check that out. But that's also part of life, and you have to decide what's important to you.
What was it that was off limits to you in New Orleans? What do they have? What's that called? The beignets? Are you able to eat those?
The French donuts, the beignets, were actually under rabbinic supervision. I can't thank the rabbi enough of our synagogue who went and supervised the beignets, which was very easy. I asked him, how'd you do that? He said, when I went in, all the ingredients they were using, the flour, the sugar, what was already kosher. It was the easiest supervision I gave. But when you talk about off limits, New Orleans is one of the seafood capitals. You're surrounded by oysters and lobsters and crawfish and shrimp and crabs, and also really world-class restaurants, very fine restaurants. So up till a certain point, we enjoyed all of that. And then we, like I said, gradually over time gave all that up.
You could have been a vegetarian too. Then even more things would have been off limits.
That's absolutely. I have the highest bar for vegetarians and vegans. That's really hard.
Did they have a beignet benediction? Some kind of blessing that they said over it?
They should. If people listening have never had a beignet, you've got to. I encourage you to get to New Orleans and get the real deal, the real beignets from the source.
Very good. Now, would you like to share a little bit about the Torah reading, about Lech Lecha?
Right at the start, I think the first two words are really central. God tells Abraham, Lech Lecha. Lech in Hebrew means go, and Lecha means for yourself. And these two words are paired, interestingly, and they look exactly alike without the vowels put in, without the Hebrew vowels put in. The two words have the same letter. The Lech, the go, and the Lecha, for yourself, look exactly alike. And I think I have no doubt in my mind that that's intentional, because the Torah's message, God's message to Abraham, actually he was called Avram. His name gets changed to Avraham, Abraham, later on. But at this point in his life, he was called Avram, which was his birth name. God tells him, go for yourself to the land that I will show you, which ends up being identified as the land of Canaan. But the go, it's as if God is saying, you have to go. This is my command to you, whether or not you like it or not. However, it will be lecha. It will be for your benefit. And I think that that is so important. The reason I think that's so important is because I think it's true till today. I tell people all the time, go to Israel, but you're going to love it. You're going to love it in every way. In other words, go because you're a Jew, even though I tell this to non-Jews also. I really, truly tell everyone I meet, if Israel ever comes up, I say, you have to go. Just go. You're going to, and then in addition to that, you're going to love it. You're going to have so much fun. You're going to enjoy so many things. You're going to find so many things meaningful and pleasurable and amazing. And there's so much there in the land of everything to do. And I love the fact that from the very start, God said to Abraham, go, you have to go, whether you like it or not, but realize you're going to love it. And it's going to be fantastic experience for you.
Well, of course, Israel wasn't all that it's cracked up to be today in Abram's time. He didn't have all these great restaurants and nightlife and everything else. So it was a little different back then. But I also like the passage a lot. And it is an interesting way that they start Lech Lecha. Because as you say, Lecha means to you. Lech, for those people who don't know, is actually related to the word halacha. Because Lech comes from the verb holech, which is related to halacha, meaning the path or the way that you go. So Lech Lecha implies that you should seek a holy path. Lech Lecha. Lecha means for yourself, but it could also be interpreted to yourself. It could also be interpreted go within yourself. In other words, find out what your true calling is and look inside of yourself. Don't just do what everybody else is doing. And Abraham, he did that par excellence. What was going on outside didn't control who he was. And that's a great message for all of us, that yes, we should pay attention to what's happening outside, but we should go within ourselves to find out what's true for us. What is our calling? What is our message? And being called to direct yourself towards a Jewish state is very important. I agree with Rabbi Kahn. Israel's a remarkable place, not just for Jewish people, but the holy sites of Baha'i, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism are all in Israel and all respected. And it's a beautiful place for people to come together. But as important as it is to go to the Jewish state, this passage, I think, is also telling us to go to a Jewish state of mind, to go within yourself and to try to achieve a Jewish state of mind, which is different than what's going on around you. In order to achieve that, you have to not be completely ensnared by the outside world, but to have a higher calling as Abram did. Rabbi, what else intrigues you about this passage, Lech Lecha?
First, I just want to say, and I find this true every time we do this learn together. Every time you say something that I think to myself, how did I miss that? How did look to you? Go to yourself. Here I am focused on the other reading. Go for yourself, and I love that. Thank you for sharing. I hope you don't mind if I quote you.
Hey, you can plagiarize anything you want, as long as I can plagiarize from you. So that's why these dialogues are really so important, because we both have different perspectives and different things we picked up along the way, and I learned so much from you. And I think if Jews listen to rabbis of different denominations instead of only their own denomination, I think there's opportunities for learning here.
The next, it's a Torah portion of Parsha that's jam-packed, but I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to Lot, who I always have found to be a very fascinating figure. Lot was Abraham's nephew. And the Torah is very careful to tell us that he went along with Abraham and Sarah, with Abraham and Sarah, on their journey to what was called the land of Canaan. At that time, it became only in the future the land of Israel. But he came along with them, and I often wondered, how did he feel about that? He was leaving everything he knew and everything he was used to and all of his family, and he didn't have the benefit of the command from God that made Abraham know, hey, this is what I want to do. This is important for me to do. He just went along because Abraham presumably Abraham said to him, "You're coming with us." And so he came with them, and his own father had died. Lot had been orphaned from his father at an early age, the Torah tells us. So he came along, and I think it's fair to say that Abraham and Sarah were kind of like they adopted him, and he was living with them. But what's very interesting is up until a certain point, he clung to Abraham and Sarah and lived with them, as with them, with everything they did. And then at a certain point, there was a contentiousness, an argument between Abraham and Lot, or actually the Torah says between the shepherds of Abraham and the shepherds of Lot. And the rabbis think that's the key to the whole story, because Lot's shepherds used to let their camels primarily, graze anywhere they wanted to. And Abraham was very careful to only allow his animals to graze on his land or far away from where people lived, on kind of public open land that no one owned. And that became a big argument between Abraham and the shepherds of each person. And so Abraham said, "I don't want to have arguments between us. We're relatives, we're family. Let's split up and you decide where you want to go." And the Torah tells us that Lot looked towards the land of near what we would today call the Dead Sea area, to the city of Sodom and that surrounding area. And although now it's the opposite of that, then the Torah says it was extremely fertile land, extremely fertile, beautiful land. And Lot said, "I want to go there." And that, to me, is a lesson for us, that we should never give up our spirituality, our spiritual values, for materialism. And that's what Lot did. Lot said, "Well, I'm leaving Abraham, who was, of course, a great, his spiritual leader, his source of spirituality in the world." And he said, "I'm going to leave and go to this place that's physically beautiful and fertile." And of course, terrible things happen to him there. That area of the land gets wiped out, and he ends up with his two daughters, and it's a very terrible, degrading story of his what happens between him and his daughters, and incest is committed. And you think, how did Lot fall to this place? How did Lot, from his high status, joined with the family of Abraham and Sarah, how did he fall to this horrible, degraded state? And it all started when he said, "I'm going to give up on the spirituality, and I'm going to go to what's physically attractive and what's materialistically appealing to me." And I think that's pretty powerful, even till today, very much till today.
Yeah, very, very well put. In Hebrew, his name was Lot. I pronounce his name Lot. And I say that he did not give thanks for his lot in life. He was very, very fortunate. He was blessed by Abraham. Abraham made him wealthy and took him under his wing. And then Abraham was so gracious. Even though he was the patriarch, he said, "Wherever you want to go, I'll go." And then he said, "If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right." And I think that's a good lesson for us today. We need Jews who are both on the left and the right, and we all need to get along with each other. Whichever way you want to go, it's okay. We might disagree, but we can still all get along. But what Rabbi Kahn is saying is so important, because instead of choosing a righteous path and surrounding himself with Abraham and his holy mission, he took the land that seemed more fertile, but he ended up right next to Sodom and Gomorrah. And that explains his downfall, because when you're surrounded by evil and by people doing horrible things, it can't help but affect you. And so that's what happened a lot. But I wanted to ask you, Rabbi Kahn, if you take the story of Lot's wife with a grain of salt, or do you actually accept that really happened that way?
I guess I have to say I take the story with a pillar of salt, I guess is what I need to say. When I was a kid, our first trip to Israel, my parents took us to Israel when I was 10 years old. And we went to the Dead Sea area. I'll never forget that experience. I think there are certain experiences going to the Kotel, to the Western Wall the first time. There are certain things that you do in Israel the first time that you never forget. And I remember going to the Dead Sea and floating in the Dead Sea. And I also remember seeing the pillars of salt, literally. Yeah. And I tried very hard as a kid of 10 years old to figure out which one was Lot's wife. So at least at that age, I took the story quite literally. You know, through the years, for reading the story, studying Torah over and over again, I don't think that we necessarily have to take the story literally, But I will tell you something interesting that I think, which is a question that often occurs to people. Of all the ways that Lot's wife could have been punished, why was she punished by turning into a pillar of salt? And why was she punished? Which is really the fundamental lesson of that story, which is a powerful lesson. And the answer to why she was punished is because the malachim, the angels who were rescuing Lot and his family, said, don't look back. Only look forward, don't look back, don't turn around. And she turned around and she was turned into a pillar of salt, which we'll get to in just one second, but a rabbinic interpretation of that. But the key is when people are suffering, when people are, in this case, people were dying, it's a Jewish value to help if we can, but if we can't help, if we can't rescue them, and there's Lot's and his family's situation was that they could not intervene to rescue them. This was divine will being carried out, and they couldn't do anything about it. We're never supposed to look at it as if we're spectators. We can't be spectators, because when you're a spectator, you say, it's happening to them, it's not happening to me. It's got nothing to do with me. I'm a spectator. I'm just standing here watching it. So the angel said, don't look at it. When you look at it, if you can look at it and help it and do something about it, do it. But you can't do anything, so don't even look at it, because when you look at it, you separate yourself from it and you feel that it doesn't concern you. And that's an unacceptable position for a human being to take. In terms of why she was turned into a pillar of salt, so the rabbis say, in the Talmud, they say, Lot welcomed these angels. He thought they were human beings, as Abraham did when he first met them, and he welcomed them into the house, and she was very upset about it. She refused to. His wife said, this is a bad idea, don't do this. In this community, we don't welcome guests. They don't want us to have guests. We could get in trouble, and they did get in trouble in the story with the people, with their neighbors. But Lot said, no, this is my tradition. I want to welcome these guests into our house. Let's put out some food. She said, you make the food. So he made the food and he set them down. And then one of the angels said, could you please pass the salt? I know that sounds like something you would only say in modern times, but that comes right from the Talmud. Trust me. Would you please pass the salt? And so, the salt happened to be right in front of Lot's wife. And so she refused. She said, absolutely not. I don't even want you here. I don't want you to be in my house. I don't want to feed you. This is all my husband's idea. Let him give you the salt. And that is why she was turned into a pillar of salt.
So do you think that's a valid reason to assault her like that? Just because she wouldn't give him the salt? But also I find that in Hebrew, the words are very similar for angel, malach, and salt, melach. The words are very similar. So it's kind of like, okay, you're going to reject the angels. Okay, I'm going to give it right back at you. And we also have to remember what you were talking about, that you shouldn't watch people suffering with glee or rejoice in it. But we also have to remember the great part of the story where Abraham tries his best to save the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, did everything he could to go to bat for them. So he certainly did not turn his back on them at all. He did everything he possibly could. And then when he wasn't able to do more, then he left to save himself. But the story of Lot, he could have had so much, and instead he ended up corrupted. And some of the things that Lot did are really, really corrupt, and something that we just wonder, how could that happen unless he was just surrounded by his milieu of Sodom and Gomorrah. Interesting also linguistically about Sodom and Gomorrah. The name Gomorrah in Hebrew is not Gomorrah, it's with an ayin, Amorah. And the ayin is a silent letter. And people think, why do you have silent letters? What's the point of it? Why do you even bother writing an ayin or an aleph? But we know that no letters started out silent. Every letter always made a sound, but over time the letters evolved, just like people evolve and cultures evolve, and eventually became silent. But in English we say Gomorrah because the letter apparently was a guttural or something of that effect. And in the Arabic language, they have a letter that's also ayin, but it sounds kind of like a guttural sound. So that's why in Hebrew it's Amorah, and in English we say Gomorrah. But I remember that Archie Bunker and All in the Family was talking about some city. He said, these people are so corrupt, it's like a regular Sodom and Gomorrah. So the story and the passage is very, very interesting. There's a lot to get into. And but I did want to talk a little bit about the election. and then I wanted to open up to everybody else. So Rabbi Kahn, tell us what you think about the election, and also tell me if, because you are not a pulpit rabbi, if that allows you to perhaps be a little more free to speak your mind than other rabbis who are in a congregation. I imagine most Orthodox rabbis, if they felt a certain way, like if they felt like they had some problems with Trump, they wouldn't come out and say, because that would be the end of their job probably. So could you comment on those two things?
Sure, sure. Let me do the second one first, because I've found it interesting to kind of hear from my colleagues and watch how they handle it. Some of the rabbi friends, some of my rabbi friends, and have been extremely careful not to indicate in any way, by even the slightest hint, how they feel politically. And I asked them about it. I said, I think, knowing you, I think you probably have strong feelings. And the answer I got back was really what you said. Either they don't want to alienate anyone in the congregation. They know this is an election about which people are passionate on one side or the other. Both sides are passionate and have very strong views usually. And so they don't want to alienate anyone. They say, look, I want every member of my congregation to feel close to me and to feel they can trust me. And I would never want them, half of the congregation, to say, oh, we hate this guy. We can't believe he has a certain type of political view. In addition to that, they said a synagogue is technically supposed to be a non-political kind of place, and there are certain things in their bylaws apparently that don't allow them to take, sometimes, in some cases, any kind of political opinions in a public way. So that's part of it. On the other hand, I have friends who are rabbis of synagogues, pulpit rabbis, and they're all out there, and they're out there saying exactly how they feel. And not only that, they're telling their congregants, this is what you should do. And I'm like, wow, that's I can't. So the dichotomy of those two approaches is definitely out there. In terms of my own view, I have found this to be a very, very challenging, difficult situation, because for me, and not being a pulpit rabbi, I'm really do feel free to say whatever I want. In my family, there are very strong splits, really, in terms of people who passionately only feel one way and can't accept the other side. So I have to be careful when I'm invited for dinner to a family member. But other than that, I feel that Trump has done so much for Israel. We were talking about this Parsha and the centrality of Israel, and Trump has moved the embassy. He's brought about through these peace treaties with Arab countries that truly, if you follow the history of the region and of these particular countries, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, it's unprecedented. You would never in a million years, if someone would have said a few years ago that those two countries would make peace treaties, and that Saudi Arabia even somewhere is considering the remote possibility, you would have said that's absolutely impossible. It's not going to happen in our lifetime, and hopefully it'll happen in our grandchildren's lifetime. But he has brought that to be. His administration, President Trump's administration, has brought that to be. And in Israel, he is viewed, I'm not going to say by everybody, because in Israel, you have every conceivable opinion and they love to argue. But many, many Israelis view him as the best friend that Israel has ever had. So that's very powerful. And that resonates, I think, certainly resonates with me. And I think it resonates with any Jews who care about the land of Israel and the state of Israel. So that's one way of looking at it. On the other hand, I have always believed, and not everyone believes this, and I know some people completely disagree with this statement I'm about to make. I believe that the President of the United States should be a role model in terms of his character and in terms of his values, in terms of how he or she speaks, how he or she acts. It's not just about policy. It's not just about policy decisions. I'm willing to say a president's policy decisions and how that impacts the country are the most important thing. I get that. But I don't think that how a president talks and acts and treats other people is completely insignificant. I truly don't believe that. And I know as a child, that's how I was raised. My parents raised me to view the presidents of the United States, starting with George Washington, and he never told a lie, and going through all of the presidents, and Abraham Lincoln, and freed the slaves, and whatever I was taught as a kid about the different presidents. And I'm sure a lot was left out, some of the negative stuff. But presidents are role models. They set an example for us. And I personally, I don't want to offend anybody, I personally cannot look to Donald Trump as a role model. I find that he allows himself to say certain things and to behave in certain ways that are completely immoral and unethical and unacceptable. And unfortunately, I really thought that would change over time. I thought his advisors would insist that he change that over time, but I'm seeing it today. I'm seeing it right now. Every time I listen to him, every time I see him in a debate, every time I see him, even more than a debate, when you see him in his rallies, he just lets himself say things that I think are terrible for America and bad for America. So to me, that's a very hard thing. I don't want to vote against a man who supports Israel and might be the best friend that Israel ever had in the White House, but I also can't bring myself to vote for a man who I don't think he's the opposite of a moral and ethical role model. So that's where I'm at.
You know, Rabbi Kahn, it's so refreshing to hear someone speak rationally and logically on this topic, because what I find is that on the right, you have people that, okay, they say Trump helps Israel, and then all of a sudden, everything he does, they'll support or justify or find some way around it or trivialize it. And also people on the other side, on the left, they will find things that they don't like about Trump, and then everything he does is all immoral, it's all horrible, it's all wrong. And I really do find it refreshing to hear you express a point of view that's based on just a logical, rational point of view that has concern for the Jewish people, as we must, because we know that nobody else out there is really looking out for us, but also concerned with America, as we must as Americans. It's refreshing to hear you say that. I was curious also, what side are you on as far as the role of a rabbi? Do you think that the role of a rabbi should be to stay out and not mention anything about what our leaders are doing? Or should the rabbi make comments? Or is there a balance there where you can comment on what they're doing, but not come out and say, I support this person or that person? You know, if you look back in Jewish history, you'll see that Moses wasn't at all shy about denouncing Pharaoh. He didn't say, to whom it may concern, can you maybe give the Jews a day off? It was like he was in their face and he was bringing down the whole kingdom. Same thing with Nathan and David and the prophets. They were not shy about voicing their disapproval of the leaders. So I find it surprising, kind of sad, that some people are not aware of Jewish history and they think that the rabbi should never intervene. Also, it's interesting that the rabbis would say, well, we don't want to alienate people by taking a position, and then other people are going to have a different position. I don't usually hear rabbis, for instance, say, well, I don't want to advise that people should keep kosher because, gee, that might alienate the people who aren't kosher. I don't want to advise that people should observe Sabbath because that could alienate people who don't want to observe Sabbath. It's like they usually have no problem giving their opinion about various things. So it seems to me like it's somewhat of cowardice. Not necessarily that they feel it's not their place, but they don't want to alienate people because they don't want to lose members. It's not so much that they feel like it's not the role of the rabbi, but they maybe feel they don't want to lose members or be fired by their board. And so I'm curious where you come down on that as far as what the role of the rabbi should be.
There are certain times in life when I have kind of thanked Hashem, thank God that I'm not a pulpit rabbi. This would be one of those situations. I've always said and always believed that pulpit rabbis are the hardest working and sometimes most underappreciated people in the Jewish community. And that sometimes happens, unfortunately, but of course not always. And I don't envy them at all. This is a situation where if I was a rabbi of a synagogue, I honestly don't know what I would do, because I understand the benefits and the value of saying, you know, people feel so passionately, and I don't, even putting aside the job issue and the losing members, you want to feel close to your congregants in a personal way, and you don't want people to feel a distance because of your political views. On the other hand, as you said, the job of rabbis is in a small way the job of the prophets of ancient times, to tell people messages that they might not want to hear, and that makes them feel uncomfortable. And that's exactly their job, because if the rabbi isn't going to do it, who's going to do it? That's the rabbi's job. So I don't know. I have to follow your lead on this one, Rabbi Silver.
Well, I'll tell you, if our rabbis only couch their message in terms of what they think people want to hear, then the role of the rabbinate is completely undermined. And it's really no more than a social club director. It cannot be that the rabbis are only going to tell people what they want to hear. On the other hand, we don't want to have rabbis who adopt a partisan view and are going to support one party over another. That would subvert the mission of the Jewish people and make us a tool of a party. There are some who tend to do that. But I believe that we should be very cautious and very careful when we're commenting on people in political office or when we're commenting on other people. When we form an opinion on somebody else, so we see somebody doing something wrong, yes, the Torah tells us that you should chastise the wrongdoer, but before we do that, we need to be really, really careful. Before you condemn someone or criticize someone, we need to be really sure that we thought this through and tried to understand their point of view. But there does come a time, and it's clear in the Jewish tradition, there does come a time when somebody does something that's so beyond the pale that it assaults and it offends Jewish values in a significant way, then it's just cowardice not to speak up and to say something about it. And we have an obligation to it. In fact, for me, it's very simple. It's that I don't have any hesitation. It's not like I feel like I don't know if I should say something or not. I feel like I'm not capable of not speaking out when something is going so wrong. And to me, I agree with you, Rabbi Kahn, about what President Trump has done towards Israel. There are many Jewish people on the left who refuse to acknowledge anything positive. So let me acknowledge the transfer of the embassy to Jerusalem, the recognition of the Golan Heights, the talking tough to Iran, the cutting off of funding to organizations and to UNRWA, which is sponsoring terrorist acts against Jews and Israelis, and actually paying people to kill Israelis and using American funds to do it. That's outrageous. And I do commend the president for taking a stand on those things. However, there's other things that he does that I think are exceptionally harmful to Israel. And I find it very distressing that people on the right fail to recognize that and explain it all away. I even question, are they really that allied with Israel? Is there allegiance to Israel or is it to Trump? I mean, if you have an ally of Israel, the Kurds, who fought as our allies and did the dirty work in getting rid of ISIS. Now, yes, a lot of Americans risked their lives and lost their lives and were fighting courageously against ISIS, but the people who are on the ground the most, that was the Kurds. And the Kurds worked with us, and they're also allies with Israel. For President Trump to turn his back on them and allow Turkey just to come in and mow them down. Why? Because he has a couple of hotels and buildings there, and he thinks he can make a buck off the Turks, so he's willing to sell out allies. It's hard to imagine the damage that's done to Israel when someone fights and is willing to say, I support America and Israel, and you turn your back on them. Who's going to do it next? The damage is incalculable, but you don't hear anything about it. Similarly, the Israelis have said that climate change is the greatest threat to Israel, even as much as the Arabs. Climate change is a grave threat. Israel is doing everything they can in order to be free of any fossil fuels whatsoever. To have a president who says, burn, baby, burn, and who is actually adding fuel to the fire, literally, and fiddling while California burns, this is a grave threat to Israel. And it would be refreshing if we had Jewish leaders like Rabbi Kahn who are able to see rationally and say, yes, this is good, this I part company, this is okay, this I don't. But also, I think that it was really reprehensible. I think that they were actually dancing on the grave of Ruth Bader Ginsburg when she did so much to champion Jewish values as a Supreme Court justice. And before they even paid tribute to her, they're appointing someone. And the right wing is appointing someone who went against everything she believed in and all of our great Jewish values. These and so many other things are wrong. But I agree with you, Rabbi Kahn, also about the president should be a role model. How could we possibly expect little boys to grow up to be mature men and to treat women well when they see someone who is an admitted sexual abuser of women and then lying about it and then promoted to the highest office of the land and then seeing all the political party who just completely ignores it and whitewashes it. What do they learn from that? And what do little girls learn from that? What do girls learn about how they should be treated? Thank goodness we have somebody running for president who recognizes that women belong in the White House and appointed a very capable woman to be vice president, instead of having someone who has very little and often no respect for women. And the women that he really has no respect for are Lady Liberty, the Statue of Liberty, who is a beacon for immigrants, and Mother Earth. These are two women that need to have the respect of our leaders. So I thank you, Rabbi Kahn, for sharing your view. I'd like to open it up to other people now to join in the discussion. Who would like to ask any question or make any comments that you would like along these lines? Go ahead, Harris.
We've got to unmute.
Yeah, you got to unmute Harris.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, my daughter's girlfriend married an ultra-Orthodox Jew, and they moved to Israel and had 8 children. And she's a beautician, and all he's done is study the Torah 24 hours a day. Now, how does that work? That's for Rabbi Kahn.
I'm gonna let Rabbi Silver take that one.
Well, you say, how does that work? Apparently he doesn't work.
I'm just kidding.
It's not working too well.
Let me jump in. I didn't want to toss over the hard questions only to you.
I'm only here for comic effect. I'm Rabbi Kahn's straight man. We'll get a real answer out of Rabbi Kahn now. Go ahead.
Harris, that is a very important and difficult question in many parts of the world, not just in Israel. There are many parts of the world where the belief system of certain groups of ultra-Orthodox Jews, Orthodox Jews, is that it's so important. It's so important for the husband to study Torah and to grow as a Torah scholar and to grow religiously, that's really all the man does. And then the woman is left to do everything else, to bring in the livelihood, to bring in the money, and to care for the children and to run the household. And I think we can all realize, I think it's easy to see how that's not going to work for everybody. If somebody's independently wealthy and maybe the family is, the parents, the in-laws are saying, hey, you don't have to worry about a thing, we'll pay for everything, and they can live well and they can live nicely, that might be a model that could work. But when that's not the case, and that's often not the case, then you can end up with children growing up in an environment, and the wife, of course, growing up in an environment where their needs are not being met and their needs are not being attended to the way they should be. And this, again, I talked about the past assault being back in the Talmud. Believe it or not, this exact question is discussed in the Talmud, and here's what the Talmud says about it. It says that some people believe, it actually says there are 2 approaches in life. Some people believe they should just study Torah and do mitzvos all day and just focus on the religious activities and not worry about anything else. Everything else they think God will take care of it. And then there are people who realize they have to have a balance in life between their religious activities and making a living and the things that the Talmud calls derech eretz, the way of the world. You have to do these things to survive and to live and certainly to thrive in the world. And here's the Talmud's answer and to what you should do. So what should you do? The Talmud says, all we know is that the people who do the first way, it usually does not work out in the end. And the people who do the second way, that's the way to be successful in life. So the Talmud doesn't want to take, it's interesting, they don't want to take a stand and say these people are philosophically or theologically wrong, because who wants to say that somebody who's studying and growing religiously is doing the wrong thing? But what they want to say is, practically speaking, that's not going to work in this world. We have to take care of our wife and children and our families in a way that gives them respect and dignity and gives them a nice material lifestyle that they should be comfortable with. So Harris, I certainly understand the challenge of that, hearing about a kind of situation like that.
Go ahead, Emily.
Just to add to that comment, my grandparents on my father's side came from Russia. My father was born in Russia, and my grandmother came to this country, started a store, bought houses, cleaned the property, and my grandfather sat on the porch and governed. And that was the way it was in that kind of a society. It worked for them. Rabbi Kahn, just to reiterate what you said about character, it's hard for me to have respect for anyone that doesn't show kindness and respect for others, that treats others in a demeaning way. Because I've often felt that being kind is the easiest and most important thing you can do. So all of, or any of the accomplishments of our current leader fail to impress me because of the lack of empathy. And I know I should be able to separate accomplishments from character. I was glad to hear you say that.
Yeah, I just want to respond also to what Harris was bringing up. My dad was he was a classic Reform rabbi, and he always had a quip for things. So if they went out to eat, my mother handled all the money. If he went out somewhere and he needed some money, he would say to my mom before he left, says, "Hey mom, could I have a $20 bill?" And she would give him some money and parcel it out. So at the restaurant, like, they would say, "Okay, who should I give the check to?" My dad would always say, "Give it to my mother. I'm too holy to handle money." And now sometimes I use sometimes I use my wife's credit card. I say, well, she doesn't trust me with my own credit card. So there is a tradition in Judaism where the man would study and learn. And I think my dad always taught me to have a sense of values and to not do anything to an extreme. If the family is independently wealthy and they have money and they don't need to work, and the husband can study, and it was deemed to be something that in Judaism studying is very important, then okay, perhaps it could work. But in general, you don't want to burden your family by just studying all day, and you want to have a sense of values. And so if you can study and also make a living as well, that's always a good thing. I also wanted to share with you the Torah. I'm sure you're familiar with this, Rabbi Kahn. The Torah actually has a voter's guide. It actually gives us a guide for how to choose our leaders. And that came through the prophet Samuel. You see, Samuel told the people, you don't really want a king. Kings are bad news. They're going to be self-aggrandizing, and they're going to get too much power. They're going to tax you, and they're going to just make your life miserable. Don't bother. But people said, no, we want a king. So he says, all right, you can have a king. But if you have a king, let me give you a voter's guide. Here's the type of person that you want. Remember what he said, Rabbi Kahn? He's somebody who studies all day, somebody who keeps the Torah with him, and not just as a prop, but actually reads it and looks inside. Someone who doesn't amass great wealth. Don't find someone who's got lots of houses and lots of buildings. That you don't want somebody like that. You don't want somebody who's got lots of wives. No. You don't want somebody like that. You want someone who's a simple person, someone who values education and treats people well. That's how we need that. Don't you find that the case, Rabbi Kahn? There's a voter's guide in the Torah that's really telling us which candidate we should be going towards in this current election. It was written thousands of years ago.
Could we get back?
Yes, go ahead, Bev.
I get very, very upset when I hear people say that they're voting for Trump because he's the best friend to Israel. Look what he's done for Israel. And they go on and on. And I said, I love Israel. I support Israel. I'm concerned about Israel, but I'm an American Jew. And I'm really more concerned about what's happening right here in my country. And if you feel that strongly, then maybe you should go and move and live in Israel. Because I feel it's important to back all the things that are taking place in our country, which I feel are terrible under the leadership of Trump. He has destroyed and ruined so many of our basic constitutional rights, our democracy. He degrades people. He lies, terrible liar. And even now, he's saying we're round the curve. We're going around the corner. A miracle is going to happen. It's all going to disappear. How do you reconcile that with people who are in the hospital on ventilators and families who have lost members of their family? How do you believe a man like that and listen to him and even want to vote for him when it's such an obvious, blatant lie? The man has no morality, no credibility, and I can hardly wait, hopefully, that he is replaced.
Well, Bev, I really appreciate your candor, and I think that's what we need. I think there's too many people who are just mealy-mouthed and not speaking out, and I agree with you 100%, but I'll take it one step further. I do believe, as you say, he is a disaster for the United States of America, but I also believe he's very, very, very bad for Israel. And here's why. First of all, these countries that are now signing treaties with Israel and entering into agreements, these countries, we know, these countries were moving in this direction all along. I believe that all Trump did was not get in the way. If you want to see someone who really worked hard, that was President Carter. President Carter really, really worked hard to get a peace treaty under very difficult circumstances. It was like the first one. President Trump, I'll give him credit for not getting in the way of a process that's naturally moving, because the whole makeup of the Middle East is changing, where they recognize that the real threat is Iran and terrorism, and Israel is a stabilizing force. So I give him a little bit of Israel's concerned. Everything that Trump touches is contaminated and destroyed. All of his followers, all of his people, they're either in jail or they're disgraced. And if you allow him to be embraced by the Jewish community, he will destroy the Jewish community. He's already doing it. He's already causing great rifts and division and hatred. He's already supporting anti-Semites. He's already driving a rift, and he's already dragging down the morals of the Jewish people, at least a segment of them, to depths that we've never seen before. As I say, he does not support climate change. The best thing for Israel, the best thing that could possibly happen for Israel, is for us to come up with alternative energy so the Arabs can just wallow in their oil and it'll be worthless. The day that oil is worthless is the day that the Arabs are no longer a threat to Israel. And as long as he props up the oil industry, even if we have our own oil, we're still dependent on their oil, and the world's dependent on oil. The best thing to do for Israel is to find alternative energy, and then Israel will be secure. And he's going in the opposite direction. The best thing we can do for Israel is to prop up the system that we have now of our allies and working with our allies for security, and not to support dictators. The best thing to do for Israel is to tell off Saudi Arabia and say, you guys are sponsoring madrasas, which are teaching children to hate, which is a form of child abuse, destroying their childhood, brainwashing them, making them into fighters and terrorists against Israel and the United States. But he won't say that to Saudi Arabia. Why? Why won't he challenge Saudi Arabia, who's sponsoring madrasas? Why? He told us, they make me rich. Our entire foreign policy is based on who makes Trump rich and who panders to him and who fawns over him. That's how our foreign policy is. That is not good for Israel, and it's not good for America. So yes, I agree with you, Bev. I agree with you. We need to care about America, but I do not concede that he's better for Israel. I think he's far worse.